Is the Carolina Panthers defense primed for a major second half turnaround? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and of course, Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Wednesdays throughout the entirety of the regular season, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Wednesday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Yesterday, we did our midseason report card on the Panthers offense, giving the offensive unit a C- for the first 10 games of the season. But the hope is Bryce Young will continue to grow in confidence and in chemistry with Ja'Tavion Sanders, the rookie tight end, and with the other rookie receivers and Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette, and that Chuba Hubbard keeps doing his thing, and Jonathan Brooks can be a key piece for this offense moving forward, and that all of that comes together along with Dave Canales' play calling and hopeful further belief in Bryce Young to be possibly a C plus B minus unit by the end of the year, and some positive momentum heading into 2025. Looking at the defense today, we all understand that this has not been a great year for the Panthers defense, so the vast majority of these grades aren't going to be great. But at the end of the show, I do have some perspective from A'Shawn Robinson and what we possibly could see for the rest of the year defensively from Carolina. You look at the last two games, they go punt, turnover on downs to beat the Saints. Then they start off the game against the Giants and shut them out in the first half. And I understand they blew a 17-7 lead and had to go to overtime in a game where I was sitting there in the stands watching it in Munich, and I did not see how in the world Daniel Jones and that Giants offense was going to come back and tie that game. And quite honestly, had Bryce Young not made that big throw to Xavier Legette on that 3rd and 8, we may be talking about the Panthers entirely blowing that lead and losing that game in regulation. Fortunately, the defense gets a stop immediately when overtime began. 3 turnovers on the day. All of them were massive, and they get a win. And I thought that was their best defensive performance of the season, albeit against not a great offense. And the last 2 offenses they played have not been good, but go back to what Chicago did to them. And the Bears, as we have seen, they have fired their OC Shane Waldron. That is not a good offense, and they did whatever they wanted to against the Panthers. The Broncos have not been a great offense, and they had success against the Panthers defense. So you can't sit here and just say, oh, it was the Saints, it was the Giants. Same Saints team put up 47 on them week 1. And I understand they've had a lot of injuries, but this is a defensive unit that is getting better. And I think in the final 7 weeks of the season, the hope is we will see more of what I think a lot of us expected, or at least hope to see from this defense heading into the year back in August. Now, let's start off with the edge rushers, which was a position we talked a lot about throughout the offseason. I didn't have high expectations for the Panthers in terms of being a team that was going to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They were last in sacks last year, last in pressure percentage. They moved on from Brian Burns. They moved on, really, Frankie Louvu moved on from him, but from this team, as he didn't fit necessarily where they want him to play. They want to be more an inside player instead of an outside, where we see now Dan Quinn up in Washington is utilizing him in the same way he utilized Micah Parsons back in Dallas the last couple of years. Not to say Frankie Louvu is Micah Parsons, but we know Frankie Louvu is a really good player. And when he had Phil Snow as his DC, he had a 7.5 sack season in Carolina, and it wasn't the same last year when he had to, out of necessity with Shaq Thompson being out, play inside linebacker and had his sack totals come down last season from the year prior. Good player, but he's gone. Brian Burns is gone, and the Panthers replaced those guys as far as edge rush production, along with Yetur Gross-Matos, with Jadeveon Clowney and with DJ Wonnum. And we didn't see DJ Wonnum until Sunday in Munich. And you now see what this organization saw in him and felt like that's the first guy that they wanted to try to replace Brian Burns, and someone who could potentially, at his age, be the next good defensive end for Carolina for the next 5 years or so and be one of the defensive leaders. So looking at the stats right now, the Panthers are still last in the NFL in pressure percentage, according to Pro Football Reference, at 13.8, which is by a wide margin. They are in last place. They're the 32nd ranked PFF pass rush defense. Those are not surprising numbers, only 12 sacks on the season. They're second lowest in the NFL. The only team that has lower sack percentage or just total is the Atlanta Falcons, which is kind of insane that they are division leaders, and yet they can't get pressure on the quarterback, at least get home. And when you look at it, Jaden Peavy, who is the third highest leading sack total player on the Carolina Panthers, is no longer a Carolina Panther. He plays for the Houston Texans. Charles Harris, who is played on the outside for the majority of the season as a starter, and A'Shawn Robinson, who plays in the interior, those two guys are tied for the team sack lead with 3.0 sacks. The hope going into the season would have been that Clowney and that Wonnum would have been those guys. Up to this point through 10 games, that's not been the case. Now, Wonnum has not played. Clowney has been playing, but he has not really shown that edge rushing prowess he showed last year in Baltimore. And as we talked about it throughout the offseason, it's kind of been, he'll get 8, he'll get 2, he'll get like 9, he'll get 0. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. He's never really been a consistent edge rusher since his final 2 years in Houston, and that's why he's bounced around the league. But still somebody who can help out when it comes to run defense, but not necessarily the edge rusher that a lot of people like to pretend he is at this stage in his career. Not to say that he can't help the Panthers. Now, looking at the PFF grades for what they're worth, Jadeveon Clowney is ranked 61st out of 112 edge rushers so far. DJ Johnson is 88th out of 112. Charles Harris, 95th out of 112. And again, tied for the team sack lead with 3.0 sacks. So the PFF numbers don't suggest that this has been a great edge rushing group. This has, in my opinion, been one of the worst in the NFL so far this season. But they have an opportunity to get better, because Wonnum is out there. And whether you believe or I believe that Jadeveon Clowney is a threat on the outside or not, teams didn't really have to account for anyone else on this roster other than him. Now, Charles Harris has been in the league for a couple of years, so they had to look at him, but he's not somebody that scares you. If anything, everyone understands that Clowney was a number 1 overall pick, that he's had some good years. He's coming off of a really good year in Baltimore. Everyone else in this roster wasn't someone to really be concerned about. But now, when you have Clowney and you have Wonnum and Harris, who actually was inactive on Sunday in that win against the Giants in Munich, when you have those two guys, two players that NFL offense coordinator is going to have to game plan against and actually respect, that should help the Panthers all around when it comes to the pass rush from the outside and from the interior. So looking at it so far, edge rushers, I got to give it a D. When you're last in sack, or last in pressure percentage, rather, you're second lowest in the NFL with only 12 sacks. It's hard to give this anything other than a below average grade, which is what a D is. But again, DJ Wonnum, he's back. He looked really good in that game, made a major impact. And with him the final 7 weeks of the season, that can really improve the Panthers pass rush and get them to be more of a respectable unit. Now, will they still end up being one of the lower sack total teams in the NFL? I believe. I don't think they're going to go on just some tirade and start getting 5 sacks a game, but I do think that they're going to be better now that they have DJ Wonnum, who is a respectable pass rusher, having 8 sacks last year, and then 2 years prior to that in Minnesota, also having 8, having him and Jadeveon Clowney. And maybe we see more out of DJ Johnson in the final couple weeks of the season. So that's a look at the edge rushers. A D grade, but a chance to improve again in the final 7 games of the season. Defensive line is tied in there with the outside linebackers as well. We'll talk about them here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between a store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Say goodbye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you a premium wireless plan starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with a Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer in your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just just $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month and mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Report card time here on Locked On Panthers. Let's take a look at the rest of the defense, looking at the defensive line right now. Derek Brown, as we know, out for the remainder of the season with an MCL injury, suffered in the first game of the season against New Orleans on the road, and that's a massive loss. And we knew it at the time that there's no way this defensive line, which wasn't good week one with him, was going to be better the remaining weeks without him. And so far, the Panthers have the second worst rushing defense in the NFL. Now, it's not entirely on the defensive line. It's also on the outside linebackers. It's also on the linebackers trying to go up there and they fit some gaps. Overall, this has not been a great rushing defense yet again in Carolina, which has become a recurring theme really since the Panthers back in 2019 went to more of a 3-4 base defense. They've been bad against the run. Is it the scheme? Is it the players? It's got to be a combination of both, as it has been an issue for the last couple of years. So, again, second worst rushing defense in the NFL. Now, the Washington Commanders, who did play last night and lost to the Eagles, have played one more game, and they are the worst. So, the Panthers heading into last night were actually the worst, but still not great. EPA, their 30th rush defense, their 30th according to PFF when it comes to run defense. And looking at some of the grades, A'Shawn Robinson, who again is tied for the team lead with 3.0 sacks, has probably been by I think a considerable margin the best defensive tackle, just defensive lineman overall for the Panthers this season. PFF has him ranked as the 86th among 120 interior defensive linemen. Shy Tuttle, who's here in his second year in Carolina, probably last year as well, has had a couple of solid outings. Saw it against the Saints, saw it against Denver, but overall has been a disappointment since he's come to Carolina from New Orleans. 92nd of 120 interior defensive lineman. Deshaun Williams, who was here last year, then moved on, and A'Shawn Robinson was really his replacement, and he has been an upgrade over Deshaun Williams. He's not back on the active roster after not making the team up there in Buffalo and being signed to the practice squad. He's 97th out of 120, which actually is an improvement for where he was a year ago. Then LeBron Ray sits there at 114th out of 120. So you look at those guys, and you're not necessarily seeing one of the better defensive line units in the NFL. And that's kind of a common theme when you look at just the edge rushers and you look at the D-line just across this roster. Defensively, I don't really feel like the talent is necessarily there. Now, you do have experienced players in A'Shawn Robinson and in Shy Tuttle and, of course, Deshaun Williams, but they're just not making the kind of impact that their contracts suggest they should make, or that at least you would hope they'd make as consistent starters on this defense. But they are improving against the run, even if the numbers have been pretty high. Like when they played against New Orleans, they did give up. It's not New Orleans. That was actually a game where they weren't good against the run. The Broncos game, they gave 100 yards rushing again, but it wasn't like Javonte Williams and the other running back whose name escapes me from Denver were running all over them. They had them to like 3.2 tackle or yards per carry, and they were tackling better. And they have overall as a defensive tackle better in the last couple of weeks. They're just still giving up some plays, as this is still not the most talented defense, but a defense that's getting healthier, and a defensive line that's going to get some help. Jaden Crumedy, who actually has probably been ready to go for a couple of weeks now, but has not been activated, at least onto the active roster, to be able to play. He will likely make his debut, or maybe he makes against Kansas City, or maybe he's going to be an inactive, but he's ready to go, and that could be somebody that can help him out down the line, as that's a player the Panthers look at as a developmental player who they can have on this defensive line for years to come. So, again, the grades aren't going to be the best because we know this defense has not been great this season. Got to give them a D right now because they have not been average. They've not been good. They certainly have not been great. They have not failed, but they have been pretty bad. So a D, even though guys like A'Shawn Robinson, I think, have played pretty well. And there's an opportunity as they get more chemistry and they're healthier that they can be much better moving forward. Linebackers, Shaq Thompson, like Derek Brown, one of the better defensive players on the Panthers roster. He's out for the rest of the season, probably done in Carolina permanently after suffering a broken leg last year and then having the Achilles tear. Just hate it. 10 years of Shaq in Carolina. The good thing is whenever he retires, he'll be a part of the NFL pension. The bad news is he's had some significant injuries these last 2 years that are going to jeopardize his future. Now, he does say he wants to keep playing. Hard time seeing him playing in Carolina next year, especially considering the way that Josey Jewell has played since he came back from that groin and hamstring injury, and the way Trevin Wallace has played since Shaq Thompson has gone down. Like, this has been, we talk about it offensively, a pretty damn strong draft class for Dan Morgan. And we haven't even seen Jonathan Brooks. Xavier Legette has made impact plays. Tavion Sanders has made impact. When you look at just UDFAs, guys like Jalen Coker, we'll talk about Damani Richardson in a moment as well. This has been a solid rookie class where in recent years, Panthers maybe have 1, 2 tops, looking like they're going to have at least 4, maybe even 5 guys. You can look at Jaden Crumedy and Shaw Smith-Wade. That could be 5 or 6 guys out of this draft class that actually end up being solid starters or just rotational players in Carolina, which has not really been the case over the last couple of seasons. So bravo to what they've done. But really, Trevin Wallace going back to training camp was the most impressive of the rookies. A lot of people were looking to see what was Xavier Legette going to do. He had the foot injury scare, and that held him back for a little bit. You go back even to OTAs, he was slowed down by some injuries, and he wasn't even the number 3 receiver. That was Jonathan Mingo, who we know is no longer even here in Carolina. Then Jonathan Brooks, he was not ready. Wallace was somebody who was getting opportunities to go out there behind Shaq, behind Josey, and I just wondered how many opportunities he was going to get this season if both of those guys stayed healthy. Now, unfortunately, Shaq did not stay healthy, but fortunately for the future of this organization, as much as you kind of don't want to say it like that, but in a way, it does help as far as they get to see Trevin Wallace out there, and I thought so far he's acquitted himself quite well. PFF only has Josey 48 out of 83 inside linebackers, Trevin 66 out of 83. But Josey Jewell, second on the team with 52 tackles, had his best game as a Panther in that game in Munich, had the fumble recovery after Ashawn Robinson punched it out from Tyron Tracy to help set up that game-winning field goal from Eddie Pinheiro. Then he had the one-handed interception, which I still don't know how he made that play. He was outstanding. He was great against Denver. He has been really good since he came back from that injury. And Trevin Wallace, who has worn a green dot, has also been pretty good considering what the situation was when he had to take over. It was him and Claude Sherrillis waiting for Josey to come back and knowing Shaq was out for the year. I'm going to give the linebackers a B-. I think they've been slightly above average, and just also looking at what there was to be expected when Shaq went down, when Josey was not around. I thought Wallace has held up. I thought Josey's been great so far since the last couple of weeks. Going back when he came back against Denver, probably would have had them more as like a C average unit, but I think been, slightly above average. So I'll give him a B-. Trying to be a little bit more positive here, even though, it's not been a good defense. But yeah, give it B- for the linebackers so far this season. So a D for the defensive line, a D for the edge rushers, but we'll give it a B- right now for the inside linebackers in Carolina. What about the secondary? Finally, we saw 5 players who the Panthers really hope to rely on this season, all healthy in Munich. Could they be a part of the defensive turnaround in the second half of the season? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses. And here are just a few of the courses available right now. Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. All right, so we've talked about the edge rushers, talked defensive line, talked linebackers. Let's go to the back half of the Panthers defense and take a look at the secondary. Coming off of the first game where we saw Jaycee Horn, Mike Jackson, and Dane Jackson as the 3 corners, and we saw Xavier Woods and Jordan Fuller as the starting safeties. That right there should illustrate to you why this unit has had some issues this season as far as being a better unit than we thought being not even close to the kind of unit that we thought they were going to be. Now, there have been moments where, JC's been excellent. We're going to talk about him. There have been moments where Mike Jackson's played some good ball, Xavier Woods, but overall, they have struggled. And I think they've struggled more than I realized when just looking at just the cold hard numbers. The 6th worst pass defense in the NFL. They've allowed the second most net yards per attempt. They have allowed the fourth worst passer rating, the sixth highest completion percentage allowed. None of that is great to hear when it comes to the Panthers secondary, but they have a bright spot. And when you think about it, the guys who have missed time, Jordan Fuller has missed 6 games. He hurt his hamstring on the road against the Raiders and had to go on IR. Finally made his return on Sunday against the Giants in that one in Munich. We have seen Dane Jackson only 3 times this season as he missed 7 games. The expectation was that he was going to be CB2 opposite of Jaycee Horn. Now the Panthers, Dan Morgan made a really nice trade there by sending Michael Barrett, who's not going to make the roster, the 7th round pick, which they got in that trade with Deontay Johnson and Dante Jackson. They sent Michael Barrett all the way over to Seattle to get Mike Jackson to come in and be the starter as that CB2 until they got Dane Jackson. And we also understood the Panthers needed to go out there and bring in another experienced player at that cornerback spot. They had Troy Hill at the time. He was playing in the slot, but they needed another outside corner, and they were able to do that by going out and getting Mike Jackson. And I thought against at least the Raiders had a good game. Now gave it one long pass, but other than that, thought he played fairly well in that game. You go back to the game against the Saints, knowing what Cedric Wilson was going to do, he was able to get that game-winning PBU. Still think it's a terrible play call by the Saints in that situation, but he made a play. So he has shown up and has helped this team. I thought on Sunday he was fine as well. But Jaycee Horn's been the star. And Jaycee Horn has been healthy all year long as well, which is, of course, knock on wood, awesome for Carolina. The fact that he's been able to play 10 games, hopefully he can play the final 7 games, stay healthy as well. That's going to lead to the Panthers giving that man a new contract and not letting the 5th-year option be something he plays on next year, and even stretching it out to July 15th, where the deadline typically is to get those kind of deals done. I would expect the deal to get done in March for Jaycee Horn, as he has absolutely earned it with the way he has played in the previous 3 years, but the way he's certainly played this year, where the Panthers, they took a gamble on him. They understood that he had shown, and we all knew, like, Jaycee Horn has shown plenty of flashes that he's a good player. The only problem is his availability, and we have seen him be available this year, and we've seen yet again just how good of a player he is, and the Panthers are going to save themselves about $8 million had they had to do the franchise tag if they weren't able to go and get a deal done prior to the franchise tag, which I think they probably would have gotten done, just thinking at, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have, but I feel like they would have got a deal done with him. But his completion percentage allowed 44.9, one of the best in the NFL. He has 10 pass breakups. That's a career high looking at Pro Football Reference. He's allowed 4 touchdowns, which is kind of surprised. I know he gave it the Quentin Johnston one. I think they charge him for the Rashid Shaheed one to open up the season, even though it was Jordan Fuller making the wrong decision in that situation. I think JC's been excellent. PFF only has him 31st among 109. There's not 30 guys that are better than Jaycee Horn. And there are not 30 corners, not having watched every game this season. I can't imagine there are 30 corners that are better than Jaycee Horn this season in 2024. He's been excellent. Mike Jackson's 44th out of 109. Love to see that. Xavier Woods, 46th out of 87. Safeties, Jordan Fuller, 73rd out of 87. Nick Scott as well, someone who's missed time, missed 3 games. So Fuller's missed 6, Jackson's missed 7, Scott's missed 3. And the Panthers secondary has had some of the numbers that I pointed out just a moment ago, but also has had some bright spots with JC being really good, Mike Jackson having a couple of pretty good games, and Xavier Woods being fairly steady, not as good as he was, I think, last year in that safety spot. But still, this is a unit that I think now with those 5 healthy and eventually get Nick Scott back. And also you got to mention Charles Smith-Wade got an opportunity to go out there and play. Now his grades aren't great PFF wise, but he was a solid tackler. Damani Richardson had, I think, 2 solid starts there as well. When Nick Scott went out, they still didn't have Jordan Fuller back. You got some of your young guys step up and play and get some experience who are going to be a part of the future. And then now you're getting some of your veterans back. And overall, this is a pretty deep unit where in the offseason, in training camp, we felt like it was. And then they came down to not having that many players in the secondary period as far as when they did roster cutdowns and all of that. And then just the injuries. Now this is a unit that's getting healthier. So unfortunately, got to give him like a C- right now, just when you're giving up all those numbers in the top 10, as far as top 10 of the bottom of the NFL, not great, but Jaycee Horn's spectacular. And I've seen some flashes from some of these guys think that this has not been an average unit, but look, just slightly below average, but better than like a bad unit so far this season. But overall, Well, looking at this defense, I know a lot of people have not been happy with Ejiro Evero, and they've wanted him fired, even though midseason firings don't do anything but other than give some people a scalp and something to, I guess, be happy about for a couple of days. Then when the defense goes back out that Sunday and plays bad again, then what do? You feel just as bad as you felt before, and they fired somebody and it didn't do anything. And that's just how I feel about midseason firings, period. Frank Reich got fired. It did nothing. All the time, Panthers fire people and all these teams fire people. It doesn't necessarily change that much. So I didn't think that was a guy who was clearly sought after. And Connor Orr, Sports Illustrated, every year puts out head coaching candidate lists and talks to the NFL, like people behind the scenes. And Ejiro Evero is back on that list. This is a guy who had more interviews and more opportunities than Dave Canales. Seattle, where Dave Canales spent all that time, didn't want to interview him, but they wanted to interview Ejiro Evero. He could have gone and been the Packers or Rams DC had he been allowed to, and he was not under contract here in Carolina. This is a good coach. It's not been a great defense for him this year. Even looking at last year, some of the more advanced numbers, it wasn't great. A lot of injuries. Didn't have Shaq. Didn't have JC. Totally understand that. Is it an excuse? Sure. Is it a reason? Yes. But seeing them get healthier, they looked much better, albeit, got it, Giants aren't great, but they have looked better the last 2 weeks, and they're trending in the right direction. It's much better to see that than if they were continuing to give up a ton of points and be the worst scoring defense in the league and then set a record for the worst scoring defense in the NFL, which they were on track to do before what we've seen the last 2 weeks. And I think what we're going to see moving forward. And A'Shawn Robinson, he talked about it after the game in Munich, saying, I would say we're starting to come together. We're starting to make more plays on defense. We're starting to trust each other and gel and building that camaraderie and truly understanding one another and how each other plays and just truly building it. Being a brotherhood from offense, special teams to defense, I feel like this whole team is a brotherhood from the coaching staff that's really, really tight. And showing, being a young team, we are really coming together. And I think this is a good step for us taking the right direction to trend in the right way to be better. You can't do that when Jordan Fuller is missing 6 games. You can't do that when Dane Jackson is missing 7 games. Can't do that when Nick Scott is missing 3 games, when Clowney is missing a game, when Robinson himself is missing it, when Josie Jewell is missing 3 games. It's hard to have that camaraderie and understanding of one another if you're not all out there together. So they're getting healthier. They're trending in the right direction. No, I still don't believe this is the most talented defense in the NFL, but I do think that they're a lot better than what they've shown. Still, not going to be like a top 20 defense, but they're better than what they've shown in the first 8 games of the season. We've started to see that the last 2 weeks. Opponent adjusted, got it, totally understand. Has to be mentioned. They're getting better. And now DJ Wonnum back as well. Amari Barno's going to come back. We'll see what role a guy like Jaden Crumedy plays on the defensive line. My expectations for them aren't the highest still, but they're certainly a lot higher than what I've come to expect over the course of these first 10 games based off of what they're able to do against Giants and what they're able to do against Saints and looking at their overall health heading into the final 7 weeks of the season. So for me, as far as an overall grade for the defense, it's got to be incomplete. Yeah, I gave D grades, gave some C's, gave a B, but when you look at just what they've gone through and now what they're getting back and where they potentially could go, got to look at this as incomplete through these first 10 games, as I do think that this will be a better unit as we move forward in the final 7 games and what we saw for the large majority of the season. And we'll see why Ejiro Evero is a DC that a lot of people would like to talk to as their head coach, or if he's available, would like to actually be their DC somewhere else in the NFL. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Wednesdays throughout the entirety of the regular season, I answer your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding and enjoy your bye week. You can still go to the farmer's market, sit back, watch some good football. And on Monday, can have Mike K, the Charlotte Observer, as we'll talk more about the Panthers coming out of their bye week and where they could be headed in the final 7 weeks of the season.